We're going to talk about your pussies.
Yes, of course. Always. Yeah.
That's also our opener.
Yeah.
Because we rolling.
Ooh. What's up, man?
I hate to be the one to break it to you, but sex education of the past failed us. Because birds and bees, they don't fuck. Welcome to Birds and Bees Don't Fuck, a podcast where we learn exactly how bad our sex education, or lack thereof, really was. I'm your host, Arielle Zadok. I'm an intimacy coordinator, producer, and sex educator. My guest today is a comedian, actor, writer, and Thot Dad. Welcome to the show, Ify Nwadiwe!
Hey, how's it going?
Yay!
Wave.
Hello, everyone.
How's it going?
I do hope to have this on a stage one day.
Yeah.
So, that'll be fun. But yeah, we started talking about your pussies. You got a Maine Coon and a Siamese.
Yeah.
My God, that's not the normal kind of pussies we talk about on this
Yeah,
show, but
I know, but
mine sure shows up.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, no, Charlie is the Maine Coon, just huge. It's Maine Coon and Siberian, so she's not as big as like a Maine Coon can get, but she's still pretty big.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
She's still probably bigger than Rosie, which is she's like 20 pounds. So
Mm-hmm.
Maine Coons are like dog cats. They're monsters. They're so cool.
Yeah, and they act like dogs too. You know, like they'll run up when you call them. And we were, me and M, my partner, we were like recording this like pilot pod, and out of nowhere, Charlie just starts like meowing loud. And I was like, what? And then she jumps in our lap and just like, yep. I was like, that is like dog behavior.
Yeah.
It's like, I want attention, so I'm going to whine until I get my pets. You know, cats.
I will be known.
Yes. Like cats are like, I'll just hop into the lap and you know what to do. Where dogs will be like, I'm telling you.
Please pay attention.
Yes.
I am communicating with you, human, that I need love and attention.
Yeah, it's the most important thing to me. Please, I need you, pets, or I will die.
Well,
you know,
there's somebody on Instagram that does. I think he's called like Rockstar something, and he does voiceovers for dog and cat videos, and they're fucking hilarious.
Look, I love them all. That there's this I Am Dulo guy who does it, and then you have. Why am I forgetting his name? Tony
the Tiger?
No. Look, it's gonna come to me at some point randomly, and when it does, I'll say it. But another hilarious comedian that does the voiceovers. It never gets old.
It never gets old. It really does not get old. But we are.
Yeah. Every day is a march closer to
just
dirt.
Treading that line. So speaking of old, where did you grow up?
Well, right here in LA.
Hey!
Yeah, LA born and raised. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't have to go anywhere.
Do you feel like a unicorn sometimes?
You know, it's so funny because for two reasons I don't. One, I feel like we all end up gravitating towards each other like other natives.
Yeah.
But also in the back of my head, I have all the people I know that live out here. So it doesn't feel like I'm the only one in the city, because I'm like, oh yeah, no, you know, there's Weldon, he's outside the city. You know, I got DJ, you know, I got all these homies. So when people are like, wow, I like, it's a unicorn and we never see him, like I see him all the time.
I know so many people from LA. I feel like not most of my friends, but like a good chunk of y'all are from LA or like Orange County or whatever. So when people say all the time, like, oh, no one's actually from LA, I'm from New York. And like, homie, a lot of people are from New York. We grow up in the suburbs. We go to the city. We find someone, get married, have a baby, and get the fuck out of the city. Yes. And then the cycle continues, which is why I don't live in New York. Here she is. Yeah. Here's Ruby.
I knew my time.
And I don't know why Rosie's deciding to have food now.
Oh, yeah. No, that's they wait till you hit record and then they're like, wow, what's the most noise? Look.
Yeah. I must tell you,
right there.
This food has been out for like almost 24 hours. She didn't eat anything yesterday. All day.
She was waiting for this moment. It's like, no, it's too quiet. It's too quiet.
I must make myself known, and I cannot jump on the table. And so,
so I'm gonna crunch over here.
Yeah, but I think that's a really funny thing about New York and LA and the people who come in from outside.
Oh, yeah.
Because they always assume like maybe they're just not paying attention to how many people, but also, you know, New Yorkers do gravitate towards each other. So like we always find each other. So maybe there's just like a little bit of expat ghettos that form, you know, and like everyone's like,
let's go. I think there's this element too where, you know, if you're from LA, you know where to go that isn't going to be too like, you know, filled with transplants who are just kind of faking the funk. And I always, you know, I never really asked any New Yorkers this, because I feel like what happens in LA is you get a lot of transplants who move here and act like they think people in LA act, and then that's where the bad rap about LA people comes from. Do you think New York has anything like that, where people come to New York and they're like, well, this is what New Yorkers do?
No, you're good. You're good. It's like, I do think that people have a persona. And I think also in both places, they move somewhere and they're like, I'm a New Yorker. Like, bitch, no, you're not.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you're, give it a few years. Let's see if you can last 5 years here or 2 years. Let's see if you can last 6 months. And then maybe we can start talking, get a few years in, you know?
Yeah, New York is like a spot. And it's very funny because I remember growing up, I wasn't anti New York at all, because a lot of people from LA go to New York. And but there always felt like this fake, you know, rivalry. And I think it's just because of the two coasts. But then you find out that oftentimes, like, New Yorkers, you know, for the most part, like LA people. They don't like living in LA, but they like LA people, and vice versa. And it's really the people on the same coast that there's beef with. So like New York and Boston, you know, LA and San Francisco, which is funny to me because the first time I went to San Francisco, everyone's like, the rivalry. And I was like, I've never
really?
heard. Yeah. That's truly the energy. It's like, I don't even know who you are, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I will say, as a New Yorker, I did hate LA.
Oh, yeah.
I hated LA. And I came here and I was like, this place is gross.
That's always the wildest. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, this place is disgusting.
There are a lot of takedowns New Yorkers can have about LA, but the grossness is not our cross to bear.
But you know what it was? It was like, but I know my nasty. You know what I mean? Like, I know my nasty.
Yeah.
I know what my New York streets. Like, I've walked barefoot so many times in New York City.
Yeah,
terrible idea.
That's the sign of a New Yorker.
Like, I've done that so many times. Your feet hurt, your shoes, whatever. Like, you're in your 20s and you're drunk. Who cares?
Yeah. Like, I know what I'm doing. But this is some new nasty.
This is some new nasty. And I'm like, ew. And it took a few visits for me to finally be like, actually, you know what? It was living in New Zealand and having the mountains around me and knowing, I mean, working in production, like, where am I going to live? Right.
Yeah.
And then having the mountains around me and good weather and all of that, I was like, I need to be in a place where I have this. Like, I walk out my front door and I look to my right and I have a big, beautiful mountain.
Oh, yeah. It's so funny because, you know, I've always been an LA kid through and through. Huge LA pride. Always loved it. Always defensive when people try to hate on it, even though it's funny because LA people will dunk on LA. It's the sibling thing, right? Where it's like, we'll dunk on LA, but like, you, an outsider, you don't get to play this game. But I've found like new appreciation because growing up, I used to romanticize, you know, all these other cities, like the New Yorks, even like, you know, the places near the Rockies. You'd see these shows with like, you know, the mountain in the background. And it took me a while to realize like, oh, when the smog clears, we have the same, we have that right there.
That part.
Because I got like real into snowboarding and I was like, oh yeah, I can like snowboard and surf in the same day.
It's all here.
Yeah.
It's all here.
Yeah. So the main difference.
Don't move here.
Yeah,
please.
I know.
Do not move here.
But if you're looking for the main difference, I find, because I try and be the LA ambassador for all the new New Yorkers, because New York is a fun place where you can just fall into something. You can
100%.
You can just start walking down in one direction and you will find like a block party. You will find like a poppin' bar. And the problem I think a lot of New Yorkers have when you come to LA is that LA isn't like that. You have to be very intentional with what you plan to do.
Yes.
And I think that is such a huge adjustment because you leave with a lot of people being like, there's nothing going on, or, there's no culture. And it's like, oh no, it's there, but you have to go
You got to
to
find
it.
it.
Yeah.
You got to get in that car. You got to get in that Uber.
But the moment people find that and then connect with their people, that's usually when LA wins over the New Yorkers. It's like, okay, I found my people. I know my spots. I know where I need to go. I used to have like a handy dandy guide. This was like pre-lockdown. Everything's shifted since. But I was like, if you're like a Williamsburg, like New Williamsburg, like Bed-Stuy, Dork, definitely go to Echo Park. If you liked, Harlem, you definitely want to go closer to like mid-city downtown LA.
Yeah.
If you and I had it all locked down, and there's always the meme of the map going around.
Yeah, I was gonna say, have you seen that? It's pretty spot on.
Yeah, it's pretty spot on.
It's good.
I highly recommend any New Yorkers coming from LA to kind of use that meme.
Having lived in both places, it is, although I will say I live in Hollywood, which is like Manhattan.
Yeah.
And I don't like living in Manhattan.
Really?
I prefer living in Brooklyn.
Yes.
I lived in Greenpoint and I love living in Greenpoint. I prefer the neighborhoods. But the thing with LA is that like I live in Hollywood, but it's still a neighborhood.
Yes.
Like I have a chill park at the end of my street and like it is neighborhood vibes.
That is the biggest difference is like, because Manhattan is truly larger than life. Like when you're, I took Naomi, my daughter, there for the first time because, she's always heard New York. She's like, she wanted to see the City of Lights. And luckily we had to stay there for the night because of a flight discrepancy. So we stayed like in Times Square. And I was like, well, my God. You wanted to see the lights. You wanted to see it. Here we go.
Here it is.
And then we had to walk to a bus station, and then she got to see the real New York, where they don't care if you're a kid. If you need to keep walking,
we got places to go. Okay,
it was very funny and wild to realize they're like, oh, they don't care that she's a child, and then you see other New Yorker parents just dragging their kids. I'm like,
because we learn young, we gotta go.
Yeah, we
gotta move. We gotta go. We're hustling.
Yeah.
Although I will say, when I would go to the city, like if because I grew up in the suburbs, so when I would go to the city with my whole family, which we were always going in, my dad worked in the city. I mean, he still does. They moved to Florida. This man like still is in my sister's house all the time because he's still working in the city. It's like, you moved to Florida. Did you move, or you just living with my sister now? It's hilarious.
You can take the dad out the city, but you can't take the city out your dad.
Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? But like, so when we would go as a family, it would be like myself and my dad. My dad would be like in the front, and then I'd be quickly behind because both of us are like, go, 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 go. And then my mom would be like way back, and my brother would feel bad. So he'd be like waiting back. My sister was older, so she was fucking off doing her own thing.
Yeah.
But like, we would just be like in this line of us across an entire block because like my dad and I are like, we're going. You figure out your pace, but we got to go.
Yeah, we're moving. We're moving. We got places to go.
It's different. It's different. And I'll tell you, when Second City was open over here, I went through the conservatory and did all of that. And so I would just walk there, and I walk like a New Yorker. So I'm like on Hollywood Boulevard, like, I don't give a shit if you're old, you're a kid. I'm just like, I'm a weeb and bob.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I remember the first time I went to New York, which was like almost like over 10 years ago. It was my first time in New York. So I didn't go to New York till I was like in my 20s for the first time.
Wow.
And I went for DCM when I first started at UCB. And I spent like a week out there, which I was always like, that is like, you might as well move after a week because you slowly, by then they got you. You're getting mad at people. Your whole attitude has changed. And I remember coming back and then walking down Hollywood, which at the time always seemed like so packed. And then when I came back, I was like, oh, this is nothing.
Shit.
Yeah, I'm moving through people. Yeah, there's no blockage.
Yeah, you learn to just like weave and bob. Like my favorite thing is when you're walking streets and you can get through all of the lights without stopping. So I love doing that. Like if I can just keep my pace and cross the street and like cross back, like I don't care. I'll just keep crossing the street. I just want to keep moving. I don't want to stop.
Yeah. Oh, you're like I'm on it.
There's like a certain kind of joy that comes out of like catching it and catching it and catching it.
Yeah. It feels like a combo in a video game.
It does. It does. Okay. So with your sex education, did you go to a public school?
Yeah.
Okay.
I went to, so first I went to Catholic school.
Ooh.
Yeah. Right up until 7th grade. I was in Our Lady of Victory in Compton, California. And so that should let you know right there, the health was non-existent at that point. I don't know if it was too early for it, but I know it wasn't a conversation. We had religion class.
Yes.
We did not have a health class. And then I got a taste of health in high school because it was an elective, which is also kind of wild when you think about it. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. The health class was an elective that I took.
Interesting.
And it was kind of like a general health kind of sex ed thing. So we were, learning about the testes, sex, but, sex in the realm of, I think, even someone who went to a school that had sex ed, there still is a ceiling there, right? There is only so much, because it feels like, at least, I graduated in 2006. And so that generation was all about like, we'll teach you about sex, but we don't want to make it enticing. We don't want to make it too inviting. So we're going to give you the scientific beats, but we're not going to tell you how any of it really works in practice. I know that we got an explanation on condoms. I know we did probably like dental dam. Also worth noting, undiagnosed ADHD. So Downey High could have had a extensive, very great sex ed program, and I'm only getting about 10-15% of it to you right now today.
I too have ADHD. I was diagnosed when I was 10, and then it was ignored. So I was like diagnosed on like, well, I'm just gonna forget about that.
Yeah, it's the joke I've started doing recently is that I got ADHD again, because I remember as a kid being like, "Hey, Dad, I think I might have ADD. I'm not able to focus." He's like, "No, you don't." I was like, "All right, well, I guess I don't."
Yeah. Well, it's so weird because my parents took me and my brother in for testing, and he was more the hyperactive, and I was more of the docile because that's how it exhibits in men versus women. And I was 10. He would have been 13, maybe 14. We both got like the drugs because I remember taking them later in life to be anorexic.
Yeah.
Which worked out very well for me as a teenager with years long expired drugs. So that was great. But yeah, it was just kind of swept under the rug, I guess. But both of my parents are foreign too. So like, and I talked to my mom about it recently-ish because I got re-diagnosed in like over COVID. I was like this because we were like I'm used to being on set as a producer and an AD. ADHD is great to have because I'm hyper focused. Like when I'm ADing, I just stand there and I'm just like clocking everybody. I know exactly how long you're about to take. Like I know exactly where everybody is. Like same thing as producing. Like you have the capacity to fire on all cylinders, and that is good. But when I changed jobs and I was working as a health and safety person on like back to back meetings and taking emergency phone calls and all of this, that's when like some of the behavioral things started to exhibit again. And I was like, I should really find out about this shit.
Yes.
And so I too was like the whole re-diagnose thing. So I wonder how many other first generation babies had the same thing.
Oh yeah. I'm sure it is a very
grow out of it. Like I didn't know it was a thing. I thought it was just like a kid thing you'd grow out of.
Oh, look, here's the thing. My dad, definitely isn't an anti-vaxxer now, and definitely got vaccinated and stuff, but definitely had that energy when it came to mental health, where it was like ADD isn't real. Because they're like, back in Nigeria, no one had ADD. And it was like, no one was allowing themselves to say, it was looked at as like, a regular shortcoming. So there was never any thought to be like,
Yeah. And I know the attitude from my family around like therapy, for example, was just like, I can't spend money on that. That's so expensive. That's like a luxury. That's something that like, rich people have or something like that versus because my mom, especially, not my dad so much because he's Israeli, she's Scottish, but she grew up in New York. Very like Israelis generally are just more like my grandmother had a healer and all that stuff. So they're like, I knew about cupping and I knew about like all these weird oils and shit. Like, in my big fat Greek wedding, how the dad was obsessed with Windex. Yeah. My dad had his version. It was called like China oil. Yeah. Like, put it in the bath, put it in your tea, like rub it on your skin. I'm like, what? Get away. But my mom was very like doctor, medicine, like all that. But then when it came to mental health, totally different ballgame.
Oh yeah.
totally different ballgame.
Well, because I feel like there's either two approaches, right? Where it's like, oh, this is expensive and unnecessary, or this is for crazy people.
Yeah.
And so there's this aversion, and no one wants to go there because if you're seeing a shrink, sorry, I leaned away. I'm gonna get close. If you're seeing a shrink, you are. You there must be something wrong with you. And it's very funny because I started going to therapy out of, I forget what really, but it wasn't like I needed to go to therapy or it very much was, I just feel like it helps to talk to somebody. And I think it was like when I started doing some writing work, and a lot of writers are real good about like, you should just go to therapy even if you feel like you don't need to. And so I got real comfortable just, going like, it helps. And you do feel better when you just talk through your stuff. Like a lot of like my therapy is just me talking through things that happen, coming to the conclusion of my own, and like my therapist being like, yeah, seems like you got that figured out.
I mean, that's pretty much what it is, right? Yeah. Like sometimes depending on what you're working through, you may have to go through different types of exercises, different practices, and those are for more traumatic situations and deeper healing. But a lot of therapy is just hearing yourself talk about something, because how often are we outside of our heads processing an experience?
Yeah.
Or processing how we feel about an experience?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure as a writer you have to delve into so many different types of psyches or different types of characters, or there's just so much that you have to do as a writer that like, I love hearing that other writers are like, yeah, man, go to therapy.
Oh yeah, 100%. Especially if you think about people who write, I practically, work primarily on a lot of comedy stuff. But if I watch The Patient, and I feel like if you write on something like that, you are putting yourself in the headspace of something very heavy.
Oh yeah.
And you definitely should be like talking through it and just, keeping inventory on where your head is.
Yeah. I mean, this is not to pivot it into intimacy coordinating, but
please pivot. That's the podcast.
Yeah, that is the podcast. But part of why it's such an important role is because a lot of times we're filming really difficult content.
Oh, yeah.
And you're asking actors to put themselves in a position of abuse or put them in a position of vulnerability or whatever. Like, it doesn't necessarily always have to do with nudity and simulated sex. Like, that's kind of where we're at with it. But like, what we're going to see in 5 years, in 10 years, is that we're bringing intimacy coordinators in as a regular part of production to make sure that like everyone is good with the content that we're creating, and that if they're not good, that there's someone there to point them to the right resources.
Oh, 100%. And I think it just helps having that extra person on set who can advocate for you, and it doesn't feel like, it's kind of like the thing with agents and managers, right? It's much harder to go to a place that's, offering you an opportunity for work and be like, well, I would like to be paid more.
Yeah.
It's hard for them. That's why they have business affairs to talk to you. And then it's hard for you to advocate yourself because you're like, I'm just a creative. I don't know how to talk. So then that's when your agents and lawyers come in and they get to be the bad guy. And then you and your creative team gets to let them do their thing. And then you get to go into this creative environment without any of that animosity. And I think it's the same way with intimacy coordinator, where you as a actor, you want to give your best performance. You don't want to tell the director no. You don't want to say things that you are uncomfortable with. I'm sure if you are, Scarlett Johansson or, some of these bigger, people in film who can afford to say no to things, you can. But I think, it becomes more important, especially with like, things like Game of Thrones, where you might be like a day player and you're like, this, this right here is like rent for me. But so I don't want to shake the table. So if you had someone to advocate for you who's checking in, is like, this is good. And you can kind of be like, and then they're like, okay, then we'll talk through it.
I hear your and we're going to pause there.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's, it is advocating for people, because it's like, we as actors, because I came up in acting as well, it's a yes, it's literally yes and.
Yes.
So we are working within a culture and even freelancing on the production side too, like PAs growing up and all of these people, we're in a culture where no is not an option because there will be ramifications. So when someone, whether it's, you know, your agent, manager, business affairs, intimacy coordinator, when someone can come in and just say, hey, it's okay for you to say no.
Yeah.
You know this, like you're in this role because you agreed to tell the story. So that can be an issue because you signed on to the job. You knew what the story was. Granted, seasons down the road, you don't know where your character is going to go, but that's, you know, an ongoing discussion. But how you tell that story, there's so many ways to tell a story. But if you don't know that no is accessible to you, then you're going to feel like you have to tell it in this exact way, or just the pressure of a director wanting to see XYZ.
Yes.
And you were like, I don't know how I feel about that. Like, you don't even have to know if it's a yes or a no. Like, sometimes you just don't know how you feel about something, or you think you're okay until you go into a rehearsal and then you're like, I am having a trauma response right now, or I'm having a panic attack or whatever. But if there's no one there to support you in that, that's going to further whatever it is that's triggering that. So I love this new age that we're in where it's like, yeah, actors are humans. And so are the people who are shooting stuff. Like that camera person who, or like the first AC, for example, who's just sitting there like focusing. Granted, sometimes they are switched off because they're just focusing, but they're also ingesting the content. So let's say you're doing like a racial scene of harassment. That's going to impact the people who are creating. And so we have to be thinking about those impacts of our cast and crew, not just our cast, but our crew as well.
Yeah.
You know, I went on a tangent.
Yeah, no, it was a good tangent though. I was locked in. I was like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
It's good. This is like the mental health episode. I love it. I love it. Sex and mental health are like, they're so intrinsically connected. So
definitely.
Oh my God. Do you feel like you're like going to therapy impacted anything for you in terms of how you saw sexuality? You don't have to speak about your own experiences or anything like that, but just education wise, mentally wise.
Definitely. I think that, you know, so like at some point I discovered that I was like poly E&M, and in that experience I was able to find like a therapist who is like, you know, in tune with that lifestyle, like a sex therapist. And I think that really helped, because I think that whenever you're doing anything, no matter how big or small, that is alternative to like the mainstream lifestyle, it's easy for things like shame and worry to get involved. And so not only having somebody who has participated in that lifestyle, but has worked with people and know of people who are successfully doing it, it kind of just helps take your mind out of that aspect of it and lets you focus on your growth as a person. And you're so right. You know, I think just in my own journey through dating and meeting people and talking through people's experiences, it's very clear how much of your experiences, much like in mental health, a lot of your experiences growing up affects the way you act as an adult. I think it also affects the way that you are sexually and things that your relationship to it. Like, there are people who may have had, you know, a adverse reaction to, you know, them at a young age exploring something sexual about themselves. So now they have this shame attached to any and all sexuality in their adulthood. And I think that, you know, that's all interlinked. And it's just because, you know, it has nothing to do with the person and everything to do with just how, you know, they learned that association with sex. So yeah, no, mental health and sex are extremely hand in hand, because it is just like mental health affects your physical health, and sex is part of your physical health.
Yeah. And one thing that I think about all the time, especially because my initial coaching training is as a holistic health coach.
Yeah.
We were talking about relationship, but we weren't talking explicitly about sex.
Yes.
We were talking about the different types of relationships in your life. Obviously, we were talking about like food and food intake and all these other things, and that we are a whole holistic being, but we weren't talking about sex,
Oh, yeah.
explicitly about sex. And doctors don't learn about sex. Therapists don't learn about sex. I'm so happy for you that you knew enough to, or maybe it was like trial by error, but that you knew enough to find a therapist who was sex positive, who understood polyamory, who understood non-monogamy. Because one thing that a lot of people misunderstand about therapists is that once you're seeing a therapist, it's the right one, but it's like dating, and not all, most, unless they have gone out and gotten a separate sex therapy certification, they are not trained in sexuality, full stop.
Yeah.
And they can have their own thoughts and feelings about polyamory and non-monogamy that they're bringing into their clients or anything.
Definitely. That thing about therapists and therapy is so true because, not to get too messy, but it is funny because I think that, there's times where you can settle for a therapist that you are not gelling with. And I think that a lot of times, more often than not, because I think it's very easy to feel the conflict and I think it's very easy to know that you're not gelling. But I think that it's not as easy to know if you're with a therapist who isn't challenging you. Just kind of letting you, and you're not really finding any growth because they're not able to see through what you're bringing. And like, also people go into therapy and it's like, are you telling the whole truth? Because I don't know what it is, but I am super obsessed where even in therapy, if I'm talking about a conflict, I have to give all sides. Even if I think I'm right, I'm like, well, this is their side of it, this is that side, because I'm like, I can't get an honest assessment if I'm only telling you how I feel and what I take in there. And I think that's very interesting because I don't think everybody operates that way. I think a lot of people want to be told they're right. A lot of people want to be told they made the right decision because that's the hardest thing. The hardest thing you can do is realize that there was another approach to something you've done that might have had a better outcome.
Absolutely. And it's that objectivity. And the more objective you can be about a situation and just kind of as best as you can get that eagle eye view and be like, okay, well, I probably didn't need to do that. And that may have triggered them, but also that's how I was feeling and whatever. But like, I didn't need to do it that way. And they didn't need to do that way. And, here's how it could have gone better. I'm eventually going to be writing a book on a whole bunch of my sex and relationships, but I want to be telling these fun stories. But the second part of it is, well, here's how it could have gone better. Because I think that's so important that when we're looking at these stories and even if it's just like for fun or entertainment or growth or reflection or whatever, it's like, well, how could this have gone better?
Yeah. And I think it's also because we a lot of times leave conflicts, especially relationship conflict. And I mean, this could be like romantic, platonic relationships with wanting to be the one who was right in the situation when I think it's more important to be like a better partner, a better friend, a better person. So it's less about like if I was wrong and more about how did I approach this in a way that could be fulfilling to all parties. And sometimes truly, I don't want to forget that sometimes you are in situations where that person is either toxic, that person has no intention of understanding your side, no intention. I think that's one of the harder things that I think people deal with is like, I can tend to be like a people pleaser, and that can cause you to put yourself in the way of a lot of harm because you're so focused on making sure you come out with everyone liking you. You come out with everyone liking you. And so you keep pushing yourself in the range of this person who has no intention other than to try and hurt you or try and make you feel less than or try and make you feel like you're the one and try and make, you lower yourself to them. And so you come back with all these different solutions and reasons and think that you're going to somehow eventually get them to like you. And in the end, you just are more hurt. And that person walks away feeling like they've been able to manipulate you this whole time. Sometimes you just got to like be the best version of yourself and let people tell the stories they want to tell until it hits the right person who's like, that doesn't sound like this person. This sounds like, because I think that's something that I think we're afraid of, is we don't know that our true selves speak so much louder than any version someone can tell. And if you create a reputation with enough trusted people that you are, like in this case, let's just say a good person, then nothing anybody can try and say is going to break through that, because they're like, this seems weird. And either A, you're lying, B, you did something to garner that reaction, or C, something else must have happened. And hopefully 9 times out of 10, they'll check in with you and get the real story.
Yeah. Oof. I love that. There's so much goodness in all of that. But it's true. It's the art of letting go, right? We can show up in the best way that we can. We can come to the table. We can work through intentions. We can understand that impact is greater than intention. We can understand all those things. We can try to repair. We can do everything we can. And then we have to let go, because we cannot control how somebody else is feeling.
Yes.
We cannot control the stories that they tell. We cannot control the lens with which they're looking through. Oh, yeah. None of those things are anything that we can shift, change, impact. None of it. All we can do is show up to the table in the best way that we can, with all of the tools and resources that we know that we have. And then we have to let it go. And you can't dwell on things. I mean, I'm a people pleaser too. And I definitely dwell on things. I have like way too much Virgo in me. So I'm like, let me make a list of everything I did to fuck this up, and then review that list, and then maybe add some bullet points. I'm nothing if not organized. Yeah. So, it's the art of letting go. It's showing up as the best version that you can. And that's not always going to be possible. Sometimes we are just going to be too emotionally triggered. We're going to have, our amygdala is going to kind of take over, and the hormones are going to switch, and blood's going to go, and we're going to be in that arousal state. And that's not the time to try to resolve. And it's not the time to try to repair. When you're in that arousal state of, dry mouth and lots of heartbeats and small breath, and you're feeling all the feelings, that's a great indication to be like, whatever the fuck is going on here, I got to walk away from it.
Yes.
And if they want to be mad at me for walking away, that's better than whatever is going to come out of this right now, because this is not leading the charge. It's all of this body stuff that's leading the charge. And that's a really hard thing to do as well.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Being a human is hard.
Yeah. There's no instruction manual.
Yeah. One thing that you pointed out earlier that I love is noting that we don't have that many successful examples of non-monogamy or polyamory. And a big part of that is media, and a big part of that is the stories that people are telling.
Oh, yeah.
And also because people are only just now kind of learning how to navigate non-monogamy ethically.
Yeah.
But that's so important to know that people are doing it successfully.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Because the success stories, you either A, don't hear about it, or are not near it. And, I think there are so many horror stories because non-monogamy is often used to try and repair broken relationships.
Yes.
It is. And if we have the top 5 rankings of repairing broken relationships, having a baby's on there, non-monogamy is on there, threesome is
Getting
on
married.
there, the break is on there, and yes, getting married, because there's just, and I think this comes from I feel like it comes from the idea of doing everything but communicating. People will do huge relationship changes, huge shifting in the relationship, instead of just talking about it. And sometimes it's so simple. There's so many friends who I've, talked with, and they seem so frustrated with their partner, and then they, and after a while it's not bugging them as much, and then they get frustrated again, and it's not bugging them as much, and then you kind of connect the dots and learn that, like, oh, it's every time they have sex, it's not as frustrating. It's like, oh, maybe you guys aren't just having enough sex, and you're starting to resent them because you're not having enough sex, but you're not mentioning to them that you would like to have more sex, so no one knows what's going on, when that other person probably would be like, oh, okay,
I'm good, this is my level, because desire levels are different. The frequency of sex is different for each individual. And we have this conception that just because you're in a couple, you're supposed to want the exact amount of sex at the same time, in the same way, in the same style. And that is preposterous, people.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, we'd like, I'm saying this twice in 1 week. I think I'm gonna be visited by the Poly Fairy on Friday, but like
Ooh.
the relationship escalator, right?
Yes.
And I think
Well, explain the relationship escalator real quick for people who don't know what that is.
relationship escalator is pretty commonly used in most like sex therapy groups and conversations, but you would have the most, like, the mine is just going to be the baseline, so you can go and clarify, but it's just the idea that like when you go into a relationships, there's just certain steps that you go up and you can just wait for it to happen, and it's more of an expectation and entitlement and not necessarily any actual planning with your partner.
Yeah. It's kind of like you meet and you start dating and then you become monogamous, and then the monogamy turns into moving in together, and then moving in together turns into an engagement, and then the engagement turns into a marriage, and the marriage turns into a baby, and then that turns into another baby, and then all of a sudden you're dead.
Yeah, and that's so everyone
And
is
that's the only way to be in relationship.
yes, and the like macro version of it is just looking at traditional monogamy and thinking that everyone has the same idea about it. Because I think this is the thing we keep circling, right? Is that everyone thinks we have the same idea of everything instead of talking about it. And so I'm gonna bring this up again, which when that episode of the podcast I'm doing comes out, you'll hear it again. But I love talking about it. It's one of my favorite things to open this type of conversation. But I was in a work Slack and we were in the ERG group, and the conversation of emotional cheating came up, and everyone was talking about what constituted as cheating. And mind you, I was the only person in there that I know of that was like E&M poly. These are all people who consider themselves monogamous. And you had one person, it was a range of spectrums, but I think the furthest ends where you had one person who was like, as long as you don't have sex, you can make out with someone at a party. If the vibes are right, you can do all that. But as long as you don't have sex, it's not cheating. And then you had someone who's like, if you even meet with the opposite sex and do not tell me, that is cheating. And neither of those people are wrong.
But it's also like, wow, I worry when someone is in a relationship where the amount of trust in their partner is so lacking that they can't meet with someone who has different genitals than them.
Oh, and I think that just comes from like these dated, crusty, crumbling ideals, like the Mike Pence, who's like, he can't have dinner with someone who isn't his wife or his mother. It's this idea, and it's really insulting when you think about it, because a lot of it is essentially saying that you cannot trust a man to meet with the opposite sex and not have sex with them. Because of what, and we see these conversations kind of like blow up on Twitter, right? Where it's like, if your girl has a bunch of male friends, XYZ, if your man has a bunch of female friends, it was like, you should want to have a partner who doesn't have difficulty holding relationships with women. Like, yes, naturally, if there's an attraction, it's very easy to get muddy, because ideally you do want to date someone who you're friends with. Like in the most idealistic world, your partner is also your best friend. So I see the worry. But I think it's more so thinking this person and really investing, like, because if you are looking at your partner in all these relationships with women, you don't know if they're like genuine platonic relationships where he doesn't want anything. That's a problem, because there is a world in which maybe those are all just kind of like, IR sideline relationships, but then that says a lot about him than anything. And is that the type of person you want to be dating?
That's the exact point. It's like, do you really want to be with someone who is so inconsiderate to the boundaries of your relationship that you can't trust them out in the world? That's really the question. It's not, this other person's going to come in and blah, 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 blah. It's just, this is our relationship. And if I am not in a relationship dynamic where I trust that the person who I am intimate with is going to respect whatever boundaries we set up in the relationship, regardless of the environment that they're in, that's not the person that I want to be with. I want to be with somebody who can respect the boundaries of the relationship, whatever those boundaries are. It doesn't matter if they're monogamous or non-monogamous or whatever. Whatever boundaries are in the relationship that are healthy boundaries, I want to be able to trust you in that. And that doesn't mean you can't go and do this because you're going to like you can't go meet with, that's not a boundary.
Oh, yeah.
That's a problem.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was going to, really wanted to sit on this idea of boundaries because I think this therapy speak epidemic in dating is out of this world. Yeah. I mean, like, here's the thing, respectfully, Jonah Hill is just doing what I think a lot of LA women have been doing a lot of times, mostly because, they've led the charge on therapy and men are too busy just being horrible. But I think, and I don't think it is necessarily out of malice. I think we just kind of co-opt things and think that they work away without fully investigating them. Boundaries aren't just a rule you create. Boundaries are an agreement that you and a partner created together.
Yes.
So you don't get to like surprise anyone with boundaries. I went on a FaceTime date during the pandemic with someone who we talked and we had this date, and at the end of it I got like a long text message about how they were recovering from codependency and how I trampled over their boundaries. And I was like, well, I don't know how I can trample over boundaries I don't see. And once again, we talk about
that I'm not aware of.
Yeah. Where it's like, it is, I think the decision we make is how I respond to learning those boundaries, and we make them together and we proceed. You can have your own personal boundaries, but without anyone seeing them, an invisible fence is going to be ran into every time.
Yeah.
And I remember walking away from that just so very disappointed, because it almost feels like you were never given a chance. Like I would have much rather been like, oh man, I just didn't like the vibes, something more. But to like kind of accuse me of trampling over boundaries I didn't know was there, it puts it on me and not on the fact that maybe you just weren't vibing, and maybe you don't think it's going to work out, and maybe they listed all the reasons that the boundaries were trampled, but I was like, these are all things that never once I was stopped, and I was like, hey, I would feel more comfortable. Mind you, these are also very things that I think are very like I feel normal. One of the things that still stick with me is they said that I was talking about, doing things in the future, and they felt it was very presumptive. And I date under the guise of like, we plan to continue seeing each other until one of us does. We don't.
Yeah.
And it's like, and you can, I'm not saying that this thing we're doing in the future is definite, but I'm saying if we were to continue, that's what's going to happen. So it was very wild, all over the place. And then no shade, but that person is also, a relationship type person. I was like, I hope you're not teaching this.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Let's have it be known. There are a lot of problematic sex therapists. There are a lot of problematic sex coaches. There are a lot of problematic relationship coaches. There's you gotta weave through to find the right people. And I'm not even saying that like, and I'm the right person, because I'm not for some people. Yeah. I'm absolutely not for some people.
Yeah.
But it's just, we just have to be careful with all of these things. But with the boundaries, there's something else that we really need to talk about with boundaries, is that with the personal boundaries that you said, like I can have a boundary that in a polyamorous relationship, I don't want to have, like let's say I have a primary partner and we don't use barriers.
Yeah.
We're fluid bonded. We're not using barriers. That's our primary relationship. My personal boundary might be that if either one of us sleep with other people, that we're always going to use a boundary regardless of testing. That means that if my partner is like, well, I don't want to do that, I want to have barrierless sex with everyone that I'm with, then it's my job as the person who has this boundary for my own physical safety to then decide, is this something that I can continue to engage with? And maybe find some common ground that I do feel comfortable with them removing barriers with other people? Or is this just a relationship that I myself cannot be in? And so then I myself need to take the responsibility to bow out of this relationship.
Yes.
Because so often we're trying to force other people into doing things, and that's not how boundaries work. If that is your boundary, then it is up to you as the person with the boundary to walk away. Or you can find a place where the two of you have felt, you've collaborated, you feel comfortable. that feels good and it feels safe and you can move forward in this way. But we can never force somebody into agreement of our boundary. That's not healthy. That's not communicative. That's not reciprocal. That's controlling.
Yes.
You want to go back to the Jonah Hill thing. That man was controlling. That is abusive behavior because it starts with, you can't see this person. You can't do this thing. It starts with that type of control and isolation, and it only builds from there. So that should always be a red flag when someone's like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
If he didn't like any of that shit, he should have walked away. Be like, I'm so sorry. I had a great time with you. I don't personally feel comfortable being with somebody who does the things that you do. I wish you the best of luck. I thought I could handle it. You are who you were when I met you, and I wanted that. And, it's a little too much for me. Best of luck. Had a great time. Thanks. Goodbye.
Yes.
But never are we in a position to tell someone else how to live their life, Yes.
That's the good stuff.
Yeah. Sorry, I ranted a little bit there, but
that's a good rant. It's a good rant. Much needed rant.
But I think you're right in the boundaries, and the thing we really need to come back to with boundaries is that it is a blend of co-creation and personal boundaries that you walk away from.
Yes.
It's different with intimacy coordinating, since we were talking about that. Like, if somebody has a boundary that I don't want to show my nipples, that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
We're going to tell that story in a different way. Yeah. But that's that negotiation, right? That's that collaboration. Okay, we need to tell a story with your shirt off. You don't want to show your nipples. Let's figure out how to tell that story without your boobs being in it. How do we do that? And there are ways. So you can do that with your relationship boundaries as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
It's time for a pop quiz.
Ooh, okay.
Since we were talking about polyamory, what's kitchen table polyamory?
Ooh. There's so many fancy names. You have the hierarchical, you have the kitchen table polyamory. This is a guess. I don't know this, but this is a guess. I'm going to guess that it's polyamory where you meet up to talk about every encounter at the kitchen table.
Ooh, I like that interpretation. It's not correct, but I do like where your head was going.
I like that. It's like, oh, that was very good. Not right, but very good.
That's why these pop quizzes are fun, because I get to see people try to work things out. They're like, well, I never learned this thing because Zach said, let me try to figure it out. Kitchen table polyamory is when all the different people who are in relationship know each other and meet each other. So it's kind of like everyone's like a big family sitting around a kitchen table. Does it actually happen that way? Not necessarily, but a lot of people who are polyamorous, especially if you live with multiple partners, they'll engage in what's called kitchen table polyamory, where everyone does essentially sit around a table, real or imaginary, but they all know each other. A lot of times you see people raising kids together with multiple partners. So let's say there are two people that have, they nest together, which means that they live together. They're the primary relationship for each other, if it's hierarchical, whatever, but these are the two that nest together. And then this one has two partners and this one has three partners. All of those people know each other. Yeah. They all, kids' birthday parties, everybody's there. Yeah. It's things like that. And everyone interprets it in a different way, but essentially kitchen table polyamory is a style of polyamory where everyone is okay knowing each other and engaging in maybe even friendships together or other relationships together. Who knows? But yeah,
those paramours. That's another glossary term for you.
Paramours, metamor.
Metamor.
A metamor. So metamor, which I'm going to use that on a pub quiz for somebody else one day.
Yeah.
But a metamor is the person. So hairs everywhere. A metamor is if you and I were dating the same person, you and I would be metamors, because both of us are dating that other person. We are not dating, but we are two people who are dating the same person. And I think that's such a lovely little relationship.
Yeah.
I've not been in, I was in a non-monogamous relationship with someone. It was he was not ethical. I was trying to teach him how to be that way for literally years. And so whenever he'd be dating someone, I was so excited. I'm like, ooh, a little bit more. But he was also dating people who were monogamous and telling them that he was non-monogamous. So it's that's problematic. You see that a lot with a lot of male-female dynamics.
It is very interesting too, because you said he was dating, like, he was non-monogamous, but he was dating people who they were in monogamous relationships with other people.
No. They were single. This is dating in LA. So like, everyone's thirsty. Everyone's desperate here. Like, this is the worst city to date people. And so this is why I see this a lot in with clients and in personal relationships and friends and stuff like that, where and I'm just going to say primarily it happens with women and men.
Yeah.
That's the lens I'm going to choose to look for, because queer people tend to be like way more on par with all this shit. But oftentimes I will see a traditionally monogamous woman agreeing to date a non-monogamous man because she just wants to fucking date somebody. And she likes him, and maybe in her head he's going to change or whatever. So please don't do that. If you're monogamous, do not date a non-monogamous person. And if you're non-monogamous, please don't date a monogamous person. I
read a very good quote, I think by Gabrielle Smith, might have posted it, which is she's a ethical non-monogamy poly influencer. But there was a quote, or no, I think it might have been in the Explore page, but it was like, you will never be a good enough partner to change a monogamous partner into someone who is non-monogamous, because I think that is the thing that happens, right? Because I've done this before, where you're like, oh, it's on the table, this about me. And I think you learn that it's like, if they were into it, they would have been into it from the start. And if it's on the table, they're like, this is something we're going to keep trying to shove back. And then when it comes forward, no matter how you approach it, no matter how many copies of
ethical slut
polysecure you hand them and ask them to read, they, as a monogamous person, they're always going to react to, I feel, but there are no absolutes, and there are so many different reactions and people, no one's the same, but I feel that people are going to react to, no matter if you sat down, y'all agreed to it, a monogamous person is still going to feel what someone would feel in non-ethical monogamy, even when it's ethical, even when they've said it's fine, because they are not someone who ever expected to have their partner be like, and so I like hooked up with someone else, and that's cool. And they will, and that's something I had to learn, and that really crystallized when I saw that quote. It was like, because you, as the non-ethical, as the ethical non-monogamous, and as the poly person, is just going to look at it where it's like, well, I've done all these things, and I've, made you feel secure, and I've gave a good foundation, and I've told you this, and we've read this book, and we agreed to it, and you will make every excuse in the world, but at the end of the day, it doesn't, like you said very early, it doesn't change the lens that they are going to look at it in. And you can point it out to them, but it doesn't, their body has reacted to it. My partner said something very good about something. This is a game of telephone here, but something her therapist said, which is like, your first reaction is what you've been taught. And then after you think on it and have a real reaction, that's the real reaction. And I think, it's hard not to go off that first reaction when you haven't trained yourself to catch that. So if you're monogamous, no matter what you agree to, it's going to be that first reaction that feels like I've been cheated on. And you're going to follow that reaction. You're going to follow that feeling. And no matter what you're being told or reminded of, it's still like, no, this is how I feel. And what I think the bonus that stings for people in alternative lifestyles is every other monogamous person that they talk to is going to allow them to make the excuses to make that true, because they don't understand that lifestyle. And then we go back to Ify being a people pleaser and trying to repair the thing when it's like, oh, no, these people have already made up their mind of an idea of the person that I am. And no matter how all the steps that I can lay out, no matter how many like string maps I show them, they're going to look at me and say that people who are dating only sleep with each other. And you even desiring that makes you the weird one.
And I think it's also worth noting that a lot of people who are formally monogamous that wind up in these non-monogamous dynamics are relenting. They're not agreeing.
Yeah.
There's a difference between relenting because you want to be with somebody versus actively choosing a specific lifestyle. And also there's a lot of people who practice non-monogamy unethically and just like want to say like, I'm an ethical non-monogamist. No, you're not. There are a lot of things that you need to be doing in order to create that
a lot
safety
of conversations
and security.
you need to
so
be having,
many.
and they
there's
do
a lot.
not have any conversations.
It's not about you fucking everyone you want to or like not committing to anybody. It's 100,000% not that.
Yeah.
I could talk to you forever about this topic. I noticed that you're wearing a spooky shirt.
Oh yeah,
Get yoked.
Season. Yeah,
spooky season.
My nutrition shop had like spooky shirts.
Yeah,
and I was like, yeah, let's go. There's like a little Jason guy.
Oh my god, I love it. I love it. My point is, well, we do have to wrap this up, but it reminded me that this is the last episode before I take a little Christmas break.
Oh, wow.
So, yay.
Yeah.
Happy Halloween and Merry Holidays.
Ooh, spooky.
Spooky.
Ding, 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 ding. Ding, ding, ding. Ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 and ding, 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 ding.
Scream, but not be loud.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Where can people find you?
Ify Nwadiwe on Twitter and Instagram. If you're on Blue Sky, ifycomedy.com. And that's where you'll know anything I'm doing. If you're in San Diego, on the 7th of December, I will be headlining Mic Drop Comedy Club, the Gold Room. So get your tickets to that.
It's going to be after. This is going to be like December 20th.
Okay. Well, never mind.
Fuck you for not
missed
going.
it. No. Thank you for coming. I'm going to.
Yes. Thank you for coming.
Yes.
Yes. In all of the ways. Thank you for coming onto this podcast. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. Obviously, we do not shut the fuck up together, so that's always fun.
Oh, yeah.
And your comedy is great. So like anytime you see Ify, like please do go see him because he's so fucking funny. There's so many different things that we could have spoken about. And I love that this wound up being a conversation around mental health and non-monogamy and all of that. So again, thank you so much for coming.
Of course.
If you like this episode, please like it, leave a review, 5 stars, obviously. Send this to somebody. Send this. It's a great way to start conversations is to send people podcasts and then talk about them. Talking about sex and non-monogamy and all this stuff and mental health is really, really hard. So we need to use these little tools. So please do feel free to use this as a tool. It's fun.
Yeah, you'll enjoy.
Yeah. But that's it. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.